Dann begrüße ich Sie alle ganz herzlich in dem Haus der Akademien. And I will switch to English now because this is an event in English. So welcome to the House of Academies for the ones live here in person and for the people online. We have a really interesting topic today, I would say, and I will introduce myself first. I'm Olivia Denk from the ORD unit. ORD stands for Open Research Data, and we have this super new position here since last year. So it's actually also an anniversary exactly for September. And we are also responsible for the National ORD Prize that will be for the first time this year that we award scientists for their open research data practices. And today I invited 3 speakers, which are here. So I will stand up. And we have a really interesting topic. It's from tweets to findings, the challenges of data access for scientific studies on online platforms. And so I introduce you to our speakers today. So we have first Dr. Julia Krasselt. She's from the ZHAW at Winterthur and from the Department of Linguistics or Applied Linguistics, and is running a really interesting project she will tell us later about. It's called ZHAW. And she will be here, our expert for the linguistics. And then we have a second researcher, which is Dr. Julian Maitra, and he's from the University of Fribourg, and he's from the Department of Mass and Media Communication. And he has also a deep view into social media, and he will let us know about his projects. And then number 3, from Lugano, so she made all her way to Bern today, and we say hello to Suzanna Marazza from the UC, and she's also from CCdigitallaw, which is a platform running. You can hire her also for training in those questions, so she's a legal expert. So we have those 3 perspectives, 2 researcher perspectives from linguistics and communication, and then we have her perspective from the legal one. And I think this is going to be a great discussion. And the topic is really up to date at the moment, because you saw there was the European Union just launched this Digital Service Act. I think it was in August. And this is related with the following. You all use social media every day or different services like Google search, for example. And with this Digital Service Act, there was like 17 online platforms, like really large ones, were assigned to really call them very large online platforms. And there are also, you find in this list, Zalando, Instagram, so and also Twitter, now called X. And this is really interesting, and also Google search. And we will have to look now in our discussion, okay, what are these big platforms doing? And they gather so many data. And what can researchers do with that? And actually, we as private persons also contribute to this research in a way. And how is the data access on this? I think this is really interesting. And also in September, there was just the new Swiss protection law launched. So we're really focusing on a really up-to-date topic. And so this was the intro. And now we will start off. I would like to know, my first question would be, how you're involved in this, and how is the access to those platforms for you as researchers? And with the platforms we are focusing on are X and Instagram today. So please let me know how you, and what challenges do you have?
Okay, I start, obviously. So yeah, maybe just a few additional sentences on my topic of research and what I'm doing exactly as linguist. So I'm a linguist working at the Zurich University of Applied Sciences, and in my research I'm interested in how we as a society use language to communicate publicly, for example, on social media. And I'm interested in how language use shapes the way we think about certain topics. One example would be the COVID-19 pandemic, which concerned all of us, and we talk about this every day. Not so much maybe at the moment, but consider the situation 2 years ago. And I'm concerned how we use language and how this shapes our knowledge about certain topics. And one way to do this is to look how, for example, mass media does this. So this is a very traditional way to look at language use, because we are all readers of newspapers every day and we want to know what's in the newspapers, and what we read there shapes the way we think about a certain topic, for example, COVID-19. But for several years now, communication takes place on social media, and that's why it's important for me to not only look at typical mass media communication, but also on social media communication. So that's how I got involved with using Twitter, because Twitter, or now X, since Elon Musk took over, gave excellent access for researchers to data there. And I started, I think, in 2018 with a small study on the use of hashtags in Swiss energy discourses. And I was just concerned how do some accounts on Twitter use hashtags. And then I got a bigger research project during the COVID-19 pandemic, where I looked at how language is used on Twitter to talk about the pandemic, for example, by researchers, by politicians. And during that time, the access to Twitter data was excellent. We had to pay a certain amount of money. I don't remember how much we did pay, but it was quite reasonable. And this enabled us to do the research. So you can exact the postings, the retweets, a lot of metadata, where the account or where the post was sent from. You get the account name and all those valuable information.
You have to take the mic, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe that's better. Okay.
Yeah.
And so this situation completely changed a few months ago. So now you have to pay the amount of, what did we say, $40,000 per month to use the data that was almost for free a couple of months ago. And we basically had to stop doing this research. So this is the situation in a nutshell. And Twitter was quite special because it was the only platform where you could get such an easy access as a researcher. So there are, of course, many other even more important social media platforms. Maybe you will talk about Instagram, but so at least we could use Twitter, but now this is over, which is really a pity. So maybe that's my first statement on the topic.
Perfect. And can we have the perspective for Instagram, maybe?
Yeah, sure. So I'm more in communication science, or the social science perspective on communications, like who are the actors and who gets to see what on social media. So among the Instagram projects, one of them that I recently presented in Cardiff, actually 3 days ago, was about finding news values on Instagram news. Mm-hmm. So Instagram, which is I think the second most used social media platform in the world, it has more than 2.3 billion monthly active users, has become a very relevant place for the publication of news content as well. And a lot of it is quite surprisingly very traditional news stories about new laws that come into effect, like, for example, Roe versus Wade in the US, but also, of course, Ukraine war and so on. And it was surprising for us to see that many of these classic hard news topics trigger very high amounts of engagement with Instagram audiences, which we previously thought were more like kind of entertainment driven, and just want to have like more superficial like content from influencers, which of course exists on Instagram, but it's like it's more complex, the image. And yeah, when it comes to data access, so I was also using the Twitter academic API. So for me, this was for free. And yeah, I just had to apply through a form, and then you could access 10 million tweets per month, which was really generous. And I think what was really important was that you could through the API access, so application programming interface, you basically had access to a searchable database. So you could, as a researcher, once you have been like vetted and accepted that you really belong to a university, so you had to apply with your university email address, then you could basically search the platform for whatever content you wanted. And I think this is also a big difference to the Digital Services Act, where you have to, in advance, exactly describe what type of data you want to have access. But this we can maybe discuss later on. So
thank you for those first insights. And Suzanna, maybe can you tell us, where is Switzerland at the moment when we look at those two platforms? We have Twitter X and Instagram. What are the challenges there that we heard? So Elon Musk took over and there's no data access. And with the Digital Service Act, what is the Swiss perspective? What can we do with those platforms? Or what do you think? How is it developing from a legal perspective?
So I think it's difficult to have only a national perspective, because these social media are borderless, and they are not based in Switzerland, even if the users may be Swiss and you researchers are based in Switzerland and are affiliated to Swiss institutions. So yes, Switzerland is involved, of course, but it's not enough to talk about Swiss data protection law, for example, which, as you said, entered into force a few weeks ago. But we really need to consider globally the legal framework. So first of all, the Digital Service Act applies because these platforms are based in EU, in Ireland usually, or in the United States. It's not about the Digital Service Act, but there are other laws. And so they apply even if your researchers and users are in Switzerland using these platforms. There are many things to say. So what I can say right now is also we have, also according to the Swiss data protection law, we have certain exceptions to the principle, which is informed consent is necessary. And there is also an exception for research and for statistic. But it's very, very restrictive compared to the needs that you researchers in practice have. So it's always finding a fair balance between the interests involved, and it's very difficult to find this balance where all the parties involved are satisfied. So researchers from their needs are satisfied, but also users and their privacy is protected, is fully protected. Not only privacy, but also, for example, children and their knowledge, their development must be protected from all the contents that are online, and also their way of using platforms. So the information that you as researchers use should also be somehow regulated, and also the interests of these private platforms, because they are not public platforms. They're public in the sense that they are accessible from the public, but they're private companies with their private interests and financial interests. So it's very difficult to consider all these aspects involved, all these actors and interests involved, and finding a common point is the challenge from the legal, ethical, political perspective.
Thank you for these insights and this overview, let's say, and for both of you, how we know now how you get access, or how it was before Twitter's shift to X. But now let's focus more on this data that you really get out of it, and how is it protected? There's maybe like a dichotomia, how difficult it is, or what exactly data you focus on, what get you out of there. For example, if I make a tweet, do you see exactly my name, or do you just see, oh, it's a female person, or what exactly? Can you say something about this maybe?
So when we were allowed to use Twitter data for research, we got a lot of we got a lot of data. So I mean, as a linguist, I'm mostly interested in the tweet itself. I mean, in the text you produce and tweet. I did get that, and I did get all the responses to it, and if someone retweeted it. So this was my main focus, but I was also interested in what we call the metadata. So what's the username? Where was the post sent from? I mean, these were all things that you as a user could adjust or allow me as a researcher to see. If you have the geolocations on, I could see where you sent your tweet from. I could see which images you posted, the links to other websites. So I basically got everything I needed, and then I could try to correlate the way you position yourself, for example, in your tweet, the way you use language, and where you send it from, for example. I got a list of all the hashtags you used. So yeah, there was so much information I was able to use. Yeah, so it's not only the post itself, but a variety of metadata. Mm-hmm. That makes it interesting to correlate those things with each other. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe I can add that, like, so far, at least the data that I used, you basically have access to public data. So this data is all already public, because if you publish it on Twitter, I mean, everyone on Twitter can go and see your username anyway. So it's not to give the impression that you're kind of exploiting the private data of the user that he doesn't want to reveal. Of course, and it's a different question if if users in general would consent that they're being subject of research. But I think it's also important to differentiate whether, as researchers, in most cases, we're actually not interested in analyzing a specific user or what his interests or behaviors are, but rather we're interested in like aggregated data because we understand like social movements or discussions around hashtags. So it's less about actually the individual user that we want to kind of spy on or so. Yeah.
So maybe I can.
Yeah. From your perspective, how you see that?
So maybe first of all, do you make a difference between public profiles or private profiles? So if a profile is closed, you don't look at it, but then you would still be interested in also this. Well, it's not the case for Twitter because there are no closed profiles, but for Instagram, in the case of Instagram, yeah. Or you always only use.
So maybe just a word on Instagram. So yeah. Instagram data is accessible through an application that's called CrowdTangle. And that used to be a separate startup company that was later bought by Meta. And it was since the beginning focused on analyzing public data and only of public accounts, originally on Facebook and later on also on Instagram. And if you have a research access to CrowdTangle, you can only access actually data from accounts that are public anyway. So for example, from news publishers or celebrities or brands, you cannot access no data at all actually from private citizens or users.
Or also private citizens, but who decided to have a public.
You could do this on Twitter.
Okay.
And importantly, on these apps nowadays, you cannot no longer even access the content of the comments. So if you have, for example, a post about the controversial news, then it would of course be highly interesting to analyze the discussion in the comments, but this is actually no longer possible.
Yep.
Because also the companies, they restricted this, and the companies themselves, they use this argument to say, oh no, it's to protect the privacy of our users. Yep. This, for them, of course, a welcome argument to give less data to researchers.
Yeah. So we need to consider that privacy of a person is not only about the private life, for example, what I do at home. So I'm like a researcher is not interested in spying my life, my personal life, in the sense of my really closed, restricted, intimate life, but really any information about a person, an identifiable person, is a personal data. And privacy protection is about using any information about a person. So that's why even the name of a tweet, or if I write a tweet or a comment in Instagram and I give my opinion, that's already a personal data, even if it's nothing about my personal life, so to say, if we think of a home life, so to say. So yeah, that's why you're not interested in invading so much the sphere of a person, but according to data protection and the sense of privacy as it is considered in law, already trying to analyze the opinion of individuals or their behaviors, also related to the public and to public interests, such as elections or these topics, is already part of privacy, and it's already about personal data. That's why all data protection laws apply. But I would like to ask you, of all this information, of this data that you had access, do you need all this information, or you just, it's not correct to say just, you take all this information and then you are free to see what is correlated to another, and you see you are happy to be free to choose how to connect and to make links between the data, even if you, at the end, you don't need all this data, right?
Yeah, so you're totally right. So you, at least for Twitter, you got huge amount of data, and I chose what I really was interested in. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to make this point. Of course, we need to be responsible or use the data in a very responsible way. And you already said it. So we were not interested, or I didn't pick a certain account and was tracking them through the whole COVID-19 pandemic and how the account was behaving. But we do this on a quantitative way, right? We look at many accounts and see, do they behave similar? Are there certain patterns? Because that's what at least language use is, or characteristic of. We all use the same words all over and over again, or the same phrases over and over again to talk about something like COVID-19. And that's exactly what I was interested in. And of course, then I'm interested in certain metadata. So for example, when was a tweet posted? And I can correlate the content of those posts to the point in time when it was posted. For example, I have maybe 300 accounts from researchers on Twitter, which I was interested in. And I compared the postings of those accounts at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic and at the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, or 2 years after it started. And that's what I'm interested in. So I'm not interested in one specific scientist or researcher, but what are 300 of them have in common when they talk about COVID-19 at a certain point in time. And I'm not so much interested in the bio note they put on Twitter. I get this info as well, but I didn't use it. But of course I got it, and I have to decide what of these metadata do I store on my computer or on my university server. And of course, which of these information do I present in a publication or a talk at a conference, right? I can't take the profile picture and the profile name and give a tweet. I mean, I've seen talks like this, right? And then you know exactly who it was from. This is against data protection, but yeah, that's what I mean by being responsible with what you do with the data.
I would maybe add to this that I totally agree that you have to like respect ethics, and particularly if it concerns like ordinary citizens. However, if it concerns like a public figure or a politician, then I'm not at all of the opinion that you should like totally protect what they, particularly what they say in public with their name. And I think in general, I think this is an interesting dilemma, or yeah, we talked about it before, that yeah, finding this balance between whether you can just use what enters the public domain as a researcher, you can use this information, and then you're trying to always respect the privacy laws. Because even if I, as a private citizen, I go on, let's say offline, I go to a demonstration of some extremists and I hold a sign, and there is a newspaper that publishes a photograph, and my boss might see my face that is there. So I'm also I entered the public sphere, and I decided as an adult person that I want to be part of this. And it's, in my view, it's often similar on social media networks, because it is really the public sphere. And if people share their political views or opinions, or even extremist views, then it enters the public sphere. And I think many areas of research, for example, hate speech or the diffusion of false information about vaccines, or even racism or so, I think we could not research these phenomena if we would always ask the people for consent. And I think everyone agrees that these are extremely important topics that we should study, and the public interest takes precedence over whether an individual person doesn't want to have his data researched, I guess.
Yeah, so from the legal perspective, the answer to this would be the law says, actually, our Swiss federal data protection law says that if an information is released by the person in public, then it is lawful to reuse this information if the person didn't block the reuse of this information. So if I write something, my opinion, my political opinion, on a social media with an open profile, or on Twitter, X, then I implicitly accept that this information will be seen and considered by other people. I cannot then say, oh no, I didn't want certain people to see this information. But then the limit provided by the law is, okay, you are allowed, or everybody is allowed, to reuse this information released to the public, but for the same purpose for which the information was released. So then again, it is controversial, or we could discuss if doing research enters into this same purpose for which the information was released, or goes already beyond this purpose. Because then if it's a purpose beyond for which the person released the data, the information, then the consent would be necessary in order to respect their privacy. So the public interest goes only until a certain limit, which is very restrictive. It's not enough.
I think if someone publishes hate speech and he doesn't consent to being subject of research, then you shouldn't do research.
I agree. It may seem very in practice nonsense. It is, if the role of the law is to find this balance and protect all the interests involved, it's difficult to find the threshold where is okay to go on without consent, where the public interest prevails over the individual interest, and we're not. So because we know on a constitutional level, privacy has the same level as dignity, as freedom of expression. So all these rights are in the same level in our constitution, and also in universal human rights and all these international rights. So it's difficult to make kind of a hierarchy of which right should when prevail. On a general level, theoretical level, it's difficult to find this threshold, even if I think we should find in practice, in a concrete case, depending on the concrete circumstances, there's the point where to define a limit, or where to frame until what point is a private interest and where is public interest.
Perfect. And for you as researchers, do you always think there's a lot of awareness from, let's say, the public, let's call it like this, or from people outside the academic bubble, that they are also data producers? Or also, what do you think? should there be more training on the awareness that you also, I mean, you're contributing to your research? How do you see that? And how you also, as a researcher, dealing with those data protection laws?
Yeah, so I think this was my personal opinion, kind of. So I think there are many people that are just using all these platforms that have no idea actually what their data is used for. I mean, most people, even myself, who is going to read all the terms of service? You know, you just click it through because you just want to use it. And anything could be written there, that they can sell your data to whomever. They can use your biometric data of your photographs and sell it to whomever. Most people, they would just sign it because they just want to use the service. So I think it's often, yeah, very kind of theoretical, perhaps academic discussion about, but in general, I agree that you should, yeah, kind of give more training in digital skills in general, and perhaps also especially in Switzerland, where we have a kind of a tradition of self-responsibility or Eigenverantwortung, that you actually know that when you go online on social media and you share some controversial opinion, that then actually this could be accessed and seen, and you perhaps also researched by others. That if you can increase this awareness, I think this would be beneficial for all, because then they would also better know what you're actually doing.
Yeah, maybe I can. So I totally agree. So there needs to be more, digital literacy. Maybe that's also another term we could use for this. And from the perspective of researchers, I think the awareness is being raised right now through the open science and open research data movement in general. And I think there are disciplines who are quite experienced with this whole topic of data protection. For example, in medicine or research areas who do qualitative work like interviews. So they delete the names or anonymize the people who took part in the study. And there are other disciplines like the one I'm in, linguistics, who are not quite that far. I mean, I'm working with thousands of documents each day because I analyze them with statistical or machine learning methods. And of course, there are many, many names in there, and I could easily track down who did what at what point in time on social media. And through the open science movement right now, I want to share this data, and I start to think about, okay, what am I exactly sharing there? I'm giving away personal data, or I could give away personal data that I'm not allowed to. And yeah, there are some research areas who need to get more aware of this and work together with experts like you to exactly know, am I allowed to store the data? What am I allowed to share? Am I allowed to share the account name, for example, on a conference or not? So those are all those examples that are important. And also when you apply for funding for a research project, you need to consider all those problems in advance. And I think there are many research areas who still need to develop in this area.
You want to react to this?
Well, just saying, I understand that the researcher should have the double or much more energies of what you have if you need to do everything, and you spend your energies in a research, plus you need to understand law, to negotiate with a publisher, to know how to deal with personal data, etc. It's a lot to demand for a researcher, but still the researcher can be responsible for a misuse of, or for a leak of personal data, etc. And so the way data are stored, security measures, and all these principles of data protection laws should be known by researchers when dealing. So it's, but on the other side, I completely understand the lack of time and energies in understanding all these things that are not really relevant for your research, for which you already give your entire time. So it's difficult to find a way to maybe having a service to answer questions, but still researchers need to be aware of the implications.
Perfect. And maybe we switch now a little bit more to the alternatives that are appearing on the horizon in the social media game. So what do you say with Twitter's shift to X? Is there the end for you? Because you said you have to pay per month like a lot. And there are two other options at the moment, Mastodon. And what do you think about the development of Threads?
So yeah, well, right now, my answer this is there is no alternative, at least from the point of data access. I mean, I'm a researcher and I use Twitter as a platform for myself as a researcher. I post it when I'm on a conference and what paper I read and network with other researchers. I'm not on X anymore, or on, yeah, let's call it X now. I switched to Mastodon. I'm still not quite happy with it. So that's the one perspective. Okay, maybe there will be a social network that is the new Twitter for researchers. But concerning data access, I don't know if there is an alternative right now. Maybe you know better, but I think this is quite open at the moment. And yeah, I don't have an answer for that. Regarding the future.
Yeah, so actually, I think that there are alternatives, but they might be more difficult to access. Like, for example, if you try to scrape the data, that, of course, often is also against the terms of use of these platforms. So if you're actually scraping data, then you risk becoming, even for your entire life, you can be banned from using Facebook. But I think there was an important court ruling in the US where actually a researcher who went in front of the perhaps even Supreme Court or one of the highest courts, and he won because he said that if researchers actually they scrape content from platforms, it is really the public interest prevails over the trade secrets or interests of the platform. And I don't know if this also applies in Europe, but it should perhaps. Then sometimes there are also like data leaks. I mean, journalists, for example, if you have Panama Papers or things like that, there are also perhaps interesting ethical questions whether you can use data from leaked sources for research. But I would also argue that, for example, in the case of the Panama Papers, where I think it was about tax evasion from very powerful people, then perhaps there is a high public interest. Yeah, then are still some open APIs, like for example, Wikipedia, where you can, if you have like some coding skills, of course, you need to be able to use like R or Python. You can access content, for example, from Wikipedia, even the number of views of certain articles. And you could also do, I'm also thinking about such a project, there are interesting comparisons. For example, if you take Wikipedia articles of politicians, let's say of Swiss politicians in the parliament, then for sure you will find discrepancies, like probably there will be more, perhaps longer text articles for male politicians. And it could also be interesting to see the access numbers. So especially now when there is upcoming elections, if people, for example, it's just a hypothesis now, they are accessing more frequently to the Wikipedia pages of the Swiss People Party's members, for example. So these could be interesting research questions which you could still analyze. And I guess the Wikipedia API will remain open. Then I also heard about other programs like YouTube and also even TikTok. They have these programs. I think they're only accessible for US-based researchers, but once again, you have to apply, and you have to apply with a specific research project where you explain which data you want and how you're going to use it. But yeah, so I don't know the exact details of what data are accessible, but especially in the case of TikTok, which is extremely relevant, particularly for younger audiences, this might be very promising. So I don't know if they're going to roll this out in Europe as well. then I will perhaps apply, I guess.
All right. And for threats, what do you think? Because at the moment it's not illegal to use it here, but do you have an impression it will come to Europe, or do you have news about that?
It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
We will see. We need time to see how it will be, how the entire legal framework will be developed in this direction.
Right. And from, let's say, I mean, we're on Bern. So, and if you would have the chance to go to Parliament right now, so as a researcher, or from your perspective also, what do you want to say from a research perspective? What would be your statement to improve your situation?
Well, I didn't prepare a speech. And it's really a hard question. No, I think when you consider the Digital Services Act in Europe, I think this is the right way to go. I mean, it's not perfect. We talked a little bit about this before, that there are quite some things missing. And so Switzerland is at the moment working on something comparable like the Digital Services Act. And I think it would at least be nice to be in line with the European perspective, so that that there's a law that allows you as a researcher to apply for access on all those platforms, and that they don't make it too hard to apply for such access. So in the Digital Services Act so you need to formulate a certain risk, and this is the reason why you want to get access to the data. For example, the fake news or hate speech would be a risk. And in my research, I'm not really concerned with these kind of risk. I'm just interested in how is language used in public discourse, because this tells us something about society at large. And yeah, but I would need access for this. And this is maybe hard to argue because there's no immediate risk there. So I think this would be nice to have a quite flexible way for researchers to apply for access. It's okay to apply for it. I don't want it for free all the time, and I need to have a research question and as a specific purpose, but yeah, it needs to be very flexible and not tied to any kind of risk that I need to do my research on.
Yeah, so I also believe that the digital services actually goes in the right direction. But if Switzerland is to apply similar legislation, they should perhaps try to have less red tape, and that it's going quicker and faster. Because with the Digital Services Act, you have to apply through several instances in between institutions that are reviewing your application, and only then contacting the platform, which can still deny it. And then it's a long process. But if you want to study like really important developments like elections, it doesn't help me if I can analyze it like 6 months after the election is over. So yeah, and I think that actually what was there before with the Twitter academic API, and now which is still accessible at least for some people with CrowdTangle for Facebook data and Instagram data, where you have a searchable database, where you as a researcher, you can also look for all kinds of different data before you decide on what exactly you want to research, because this is also a difference to the Digital Services Act, where you have to in advance very exactly define what kinds of data you want to analyze and with what outcome. But often, especially if you do exploratory research, you don't know this in advance, because you first have to see the patterns that are in the data itself before you can decide on interesting research questions.
Yes, of course. And what do you think?
Thank you. Well, I think first of all, finding a way to be able to access aggregated data, because that's on what you are interested, not in the specific, identifying a specific person, but it's more about aggregated data, as you said. So finding really a way of a rule which permits access for research purposes of aggregated data, so that maybe either the platform itself or a neutral entity, but then it takes more time, can select the data to give to you, so that maybe already in giving you the data, the person is already not identified anymore. In that case, would be non-personal data, anonymized data, and you wouldn't need to consider any data protection law. That would be, I think, maybe it's ideally like now, but it would be the best. And concretely, I don't know how to, but that would be a good point, a good direction to go. Yeah, so I also wanted to say how to, so you are doing research, but it's still, you're not, the research is not an authority. And now, for example, the police or public prosecutors, they can investigate, they can access personal data without needing to ask for consent, and without platforms usually denying access to this data. But it's because it's an authority, and there is a proceeding, a legal a criminal proceeding going on. So maybe research should have a kind of a similar direction. You're not investigating in a criminal way, but still doing research against hate speech and disinformation is also part of a criminal field. So finding a way to grant access for research purposes for institutions, even if it's not part of an authority such as a police or public prosecutor. But I think it would be good for you to have a similar access as if you were investigating for the authority, which is almost what you are, it's similar to what you are doing.
Yes, well, I would also argue that research is like investigating the public interest. And actually, for example, journalists, but also some NGOs, they should actually also have access, in my view, to data that is spread in the public sphere, the online public sphere, yeah, without too many hurdles.
Yeah. So when the purposes are against or hate speech, and for these goals, there should be a way to, yeah. So these are the hopes for a future development from my side.
And I think it's time to close with that statements, the discussion. And I thank you so much for those insights. And we will have now time to your questions, so from the audience and from the people online. So let me know, and let's ask some questions to our great speakers. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Wonderful, great. So what thank you so much. But what I didn't really get is the thing with Instagram, Facebook. So we talked about Twitter. It's just costs too much. Isn't open anymore really. But you did research with Instagram data. So how is it there? Is it possible? Is it just too complicated? I didn't get that really.
Okay, so yeah, so access to Facebook and Instagram data, which both belong to Meta. It's working through this application called CrowdTangle, and which is now part of Meta itself. So it's actually analytics software that is owned and operated by Meta. And there is a vetting process. So you have to, as a researcher, you have to apply with your university email, and you have to also describe your research project and what you're using the data for. And then there is, I guess, some human in the loop who is reviewing your application, and they decide they grant you access or they deny it. But then usually you get access to research the entire platform. So it's not only in practice restricted to exactly what you asked, which makes it, of course, interesting. But I heard, I think you too, that they have kind of stopped new applications from researchers. And of course, this is a similar problem like with Elon Musk, who actually, they are kind of autocratic leaders. They could just come and they can just change the policy. And as far as I understood it, so within Facebook, or within Meta, how it's called now, there is actually an internal like conflict between some people who are actually in favor of more transparency for the platform, because they say in essence, then it's good for our reputation. But then the other faction, they say no, but then researchers and journalists, they use this data to find like bad things that are going on our platform, and it's used against us, and it's actually very bad for our reputation. So on Twitter, there were lots of rumors that CrowdJungle 2 might be shut off anytime. So yeah, it is still the same situation today. So no one knows how long this will go on, and also if you can get new access to it.
If I can add from the legal perspective to this point, also something that has to be concluded, that we need to, policymakers need to find a solution to the dilemma: what prevails, the interest of the company, the private interest, or the company deciding to have a restrictive policy, or the law which requires, for example, certain access. So right now, it's controversial if there are terms and conditions of the platform which are accepted by users and which may be in conflict with the law of the country where the user is, what prevails, the terms and conditions accepted or the law of the country of the user. And it's controversial. It's a gray zone that has to be defined, but because of this global borderless interconnection, it's difficult. If it was only a problem within one only country, it would be much easier to define. Like, for example, also contracts, any contract here in Switzerland, if it's in conflict with the law prevails, and that's often the case with copyrights, other fields, whereas it's not always the case in other countries. So again, if for their private interest, as you said, for reputation, for their political views, they want to avoid access to data, even if the law requires this access, what prevails, and that's something that has to be, hopefully soon, has to be defined.
I have quite a general question, maybe to all of you on the panel, including you, Olivia, from an open data perspective. Is social media special in granting access to researchers, or can we imagine other fields, I don't know, maybe car data, mobility data, that potentially could be analyzed by researchers, or meteorological data, where we see a certain restriction on access to, just to understand whether social media is in any way specific, or do we have a general problem here?
Just comes to my mind, from the legal perspective, I think there is no much difference if it's not for the small difference, which is not small, but the fact that social media really, there is a higher risk in misusing the data taken from social media, because they are used by children, adults all over the world to talk about politics, to talk about any topic, more delicate topic, but also not delicate topics. So that's why I think the risk in social media is because of the potential misuse of data that can come from social media data, which I don't really see in other kind of platforms that you mentioned.
Yeah, so if I understood the question correctly, I would also see a difference that social media data, it's like social. So it's a direct communication of people among each other, and where their attention is actually directed on some content, which is perhaps not the same if you drive around in your car and then it's mobility data. But of course, this could also be extremely interesting to find the patterns of social movements and so on.
And I just want to add, because context of the Digital Service Act, they really declared 70 platforms that are very large online platforms. So this is really a fixed term, very large. And this is from the user perspective. So how many users they have. And so they are really huge. So you have those 17 platforms like Instagram, for example, that are really used from so many people. And this is outstanding if you want to compare this. So this is also a reason.
Or perhaps Uber is also part of this, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, also you have Zalando. I mean, so
Yeah.
and who is also on the list, Wikipedia. Yeah. So it's really huge.
Another question, is this now just bad luck for science? or are they kind of coordinated lobbying moves by scientific organizations, let's say in Europe, to start somewhere to change this, to have laws that guarantee you re-access to this data? Of course, could be a public interest. As you mentioned, probably it has two sides, but there could be, of course, a public interest that these data are analyzed. So are there these coordinated lobbying moves by scientific organizations?
So I think that I got an email from the EU actually, because they were asking all kinds of researchers, for their opinion in the exact wording of the Digital Services Act. And there are actually some interesting feedbacks. I think these are all public. Interestingly, there are also lots of researchers from the US that are giving their opinion and recommendations on how the Digital Services Act paragraph should actually be formulated to really guarantee a useful data access. So yeah, I'm not extremely familiar with the Digital Services Act, but I guess there was certainly an exchange also with researchers.
Yes, there is a report from the European. There is a report from the European Committee. I don't remember the name exactly, where the report, they try to like put together the requirements of the Digital Service Act and the GDPR in order to also give like a draft of request to platforms that is compliant with. But then again, if then the platform accepts to give access and when, that's another question. But yeah, so there are, and also here in Switzerland, there are going on that direction, but I cannot tell exactly the name.
Are there questions online? No, not at the moment, or comments? So maybe one last question. People here in the room? Yeah.
Spoke a bit about, for good reason, about getting access of data for you, for the research community. Now the other way, your responsibility, our responsibility as researchers of protecting that with power comes responsibility. The access that you have or would get further on would be interesting to politicians, other companies. Is that an equal discussion? Where's the boundary? I mean, your computers must be super protected. Is that equally evolving as a concerned citizen, so to say? I'm very glad we have a legal representative here. Maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, so thank you for the very interesting question. So as I said before, it would be maybe interesting a direction where researchers doing research for the purpose of avoiding hate speech and disinformation would be a bit similar to like police or public prosecutor dealing with a proceeding. But then that's the point. There are limits also for the public prosecutor, for the police in using these data. They only use for this only proceeding, not for other purposes. They don't transfer the data to other parties. that would be the same also for researchers if they would manage data similarly as an authority. Right now, all data protection laws require these principles of, for example, the most important in this case would be storage, security measures in storing data, and deleting data as soon as they are not necessary anymore. So the fact of storing data, because maybe one day they will be useful for another research or so, is not lawful. Yes, so there are already now principles or more than principles, requirements from data protection laws for researchers when dealing with personal data, in order to avoid the fact that a researcher may maybe have an interest also in giving this data forward to other entities. And so here we talk about researchers for certain purposes that are in line with a public interest. It's another thing when a research is made by a private company for financial private interests so that's another field, I guess.
Perhaps just to add, I think we shouldn't have any illusions. So I think that there are many companies that have perhaps even access to much more data than researchers do, and they're exploiting this anyway, what is public. I mean, all the financial transactions, they're also kind of Twitter data. It was feeding into them to make more profits. I think in many other countries outside of Europe, it can be a huge problem if, for example, police or so, they use social media for surveillance or even prosecuting people. Think of Iran, for example, protests there. So yes, definitely very serious concerns.
Okay, reactions to this, or someone has a wish list? Otherwise, we will close this science afternoon. And I thank you so much for listening. Also, people online, thank you. And of course, our three fantastic speakers. So thank you so much, and please have a big applause.